At 8:44 on the morning of June 15, 1944, First Lieutenant Frank Tachsky hunkered down in a Higgins boat just 300 yards off the southern shores of Saipan. Around him, Japanese artillery rounds burst in the surf, sending plumes of water into the air as the vessel rocked with each explosion. The 29-year-old Marine officer, a native of New Brighton, Pennsylvania, led a detachment of 40 men behind him, every single one hand-picked from military brigs or punishment details. Their mission was a daunting one: operate independently behind enemy lines for days on end, facing off against a Japanese garrison estimated by intelligence to number 30,000 troops. Tachsky's scout sniper platoon had spent 6 months training at Camp Tarawa in Hawaii, but Saipan would mark their first taste of real combat. Marine Corps strategists had already calculated that scout sniper units in the Pacific Theater suffered an average casualty rate of 73%, a statistic that loomed over the men as they waited to hit the beach. What many didn't know was that this platoon was the Marine Corps' second attempt to field an elite reconnaissance unit born from the bloodshed of the Battle of Tarawa 7 months earlier. During that brutal 76-hour battle, the 6th Marine Regiment lost 994 men. Colonel James Risley, who served with the regiment, believed that better intelligence on Japanese fortifications could drastically reduce such catastrophic losses. He needed soldiers who could kill quietly, map enemy positions with precision, and survive alone in hostile territory, skills that standard Marine training didn't prioritize. While regular Marine instruction produced exceptional riflemen and assault troops, Risley sought something different: men who thought for themselves, flouted rules, and weren't afraid to fight dirty. He found his candidates in the ranks of punishment details. Tachsky had strict criteria for his recruits. When 2 Marines brawled, the winner, sent to the brig, was the one he wanted, not the loser who ended up in the infirmary. A history of disciplinary action for fighting proved a man could hold his own in close-quarters combat. The Marine Corps labeled these men troublemakers. Tachsky called them survivors. Over 2 months at Camp Tarawa, he assembled 42 Marines from punishment details across the 2nd Marine Division. Their ages ranged from 17 to 34, and most had criminal records before enlisting, some for theft, assault, or fighting. One was a former professional boxer. Another had worked as a bodyguard for a Chicago gangster. Faced with a choice between military prison and combat duty, all chose the latter. Training at Camp Tarawa focused on specialized skills outside the regular Marine curriculum. The men mastered silent killing techniques using knives in their bare hands, learning to sneak up on a sentry from behind and break his neck without making a sound. They practiced moving through jungle terrain without disturbing a single leaf, deciphering Japanese maps and documents, and coordinating naval gunfire and artillery strikes. Equipped with M1903 Springfield rifles, fitted with 8-power scopes, they trained to hit man-sized targets from 600 yards away. They also familiarized themselves with bazookas, learning to take out tanks and fortified positions, and studied Japanese tactics to understand how the enemy defended islands and deployed troops. Another critical skill the platoon honed was theft, a necessity for Marines in 1944, as the Corps was the most poorly equipped branch of the U.S. military at the time. Stuck with surplus World War I weapons, outdated gear, and insufficient rations, Marines often stole from better supplied Army and Navy units to survive. Tachsky's men excelled at this. They raided Army supply depots for food, Navy warehouses for equipment, and even made off with jeeps and trucks. Their reputation earned them the nickname the 40 Thieves from other members of the 6th Regiment, a moniker that stuck. By June 1944, the 40 Thieves had completed their training. They knew how to fight, hide, and kill without a trace. They'd memorized Japanese fortification patterns and studied aerial photos of Saipan. Their orders were clear: land with the first assault wave, push inland ahead of the main force, locate Japanese positions and radio coordinates to artillery and naval units, then vanish into the jungle to continue mapping enemy defenses. They'd spend days behind enemy lines with no support, no reinforcements, and no hope of rescue if captured. Intelligence briefings painted a grim picture of what awaited them. Saipan was the first Japanese territory the U.S. would invade, and the island was considered part of Japan itself, not occupied land. The Japanese would defend it with suicidal resolve, bolstered by 30,000 Imperial Army and Navy troops, plus thousands of armed civilians. Stretching 14 miles long and 5 miles wide, Saipan's central peak, Mount Tapacha, rose 1,500 feet, giving the Japanese unobstructed views of every beach. Concrete pillboxes, interconnected trenches, and underground bunkers dotted the island, with every beach and valley pre-registered for artillery and mortar fire. American casualties were expected to surpass 50%. Curious if Tachsky's ragtag group of survivors made it through what came next? Hit that like button. It helps the algorithm share this untold story with more people. Subscribe for more forgotten pieces of history. Now back to Tachsky. The Higgins boat's ramp dropped into chest-deep water, and Tachsky led his men forward through the surf as machine gun fire sprayed the area around them. They reached the beach at 8:47 a.m., just as Japanese mortars began raining down on the assault waves. Men fell in the surf, on the sand, and at the seawall, but Tachsky's platoon pushed inland quickly. Their orders simple: keep moving, find the enemy, radio their positions, and stay alive. By 9:30 a.m., they'd advanced 300 yards inland, farther than any other Marine unit on the beach, leaving them isolated in enemy territory with 30,000 Japanese soldiers somewhere in the jungle ahead. Night would fall in 9 hours, and that's when their real mission would begin. The 40 thieves moved through dense jungle, spaced 50 yards apart, maintaining visual contact using hand signals Tachsky had developed during training. Unlike standard Marine tactics, which emphasize staying together in formation and maintaining constant radio contact with command, Tachsky's orders were unconventional. His platoon would operate independently, reporting enemy positions but making their own tactical calls. No other Marine unit on Saipan had that level of authority. At 10:15 a.m., Sergeant Bill Knopple spotted the first Japanese position, a concrete pillbox built into the side of a ridge, its interlocking fields of fire covering the valley below, where the 2nd Marine Division would advance later that afternoon. Inside the pillbox sat a Type 92 heavy machine gun with a 7-man crew, its exterior camouflaged with vegetation to blend into the landscape and remain unseen from the beach. Marine assault units moving through the valley would walk straight into a deadly kill zone, and Tachsky's map showed the machine gun covered all 3 possible routes for the Marine advance. Taking out the pillbox would save dozens, possibly hundreds of Marine lives, but launching an attack would expose the 40 thieves' position and compromise their reconnaissance mission. Tachsky made his decision in 30 seconds. The platoon had brought a bazooka specifically for scenarios like this. Private Marvin Strombo took up position 80 yards from the pillbox, while the rest of the unit provided cover. At 10:32 a.m., Strombo fired a single round. The rocket struck the pillbox firing slit and detonated inside, killing the entire Japanese crew instantly. Before the smoke cleared, Tachsky's platoon had already pushed 300 yards deeper into the jungle, leaving no trace of their presence except the destroyed bunker. 4 hours later, when 2nd Marine Division units advanced through the valley, they faced no machine gun fire from that ridge. By noon, the 40 thieves had identified and mapped 17 Japanese positions, 8 machine gun nests, 4 mortar pits, 3 artillery observation posts, and 2 ammunition storage areas. Tachsky radioed the coordinates back to regimental headquarters using encoded protocols, and within 20 minutes, naval gunfire from offshore destroyers began hammering the targets. From concealed positions, the platoon watched as 5-inch shells reduced the Japanese fortifications they'd marked just 30 minutes earlier to rubble. This was their purpose: find the enemy, mark them for destruction, and vanish before the Japanese could react. By early afternoon, the platoon had advanced 2 miles inland, well ahead of any other American unit, traversing terrain the main Marine forces wouldn't reach for 3 more days. Every 100 yards revealed new Japanese positions, and the island proved far more heavily fortified than intelligence had estimated. Tachsky counted over 200 enemy soldiers in one valley alone, dug into positions that would take days of frontal assaults to capture, yet with accurate coordinates, naval gunfire could destroy them in minutes. The 40 thieves were redefining how the Marine Corps fought. At 3:40 p.m., the platoon made an unexpected discovery: a Japanese tank battalion staging area. 37 Type 97 medium tanks sat under camouflage netting in a grove north of Chiron, Kanoa, 3 times the number Marine intelligence had estimated the Japanese possessed on Saipan. These tanks posed the gravest threat to the American beachhead. Japanese doctrine called for mass tank attacks at night, when U.S. naval gunfire would be less effective. If the 37 tanks assaulted the beach after dark, they could break through Marine lines and overrun vulnerable supply areas. Tachsky immediately radioed the coordinates, but the response from headquarters came back in 8 minutes. Naval gunfire was tied up supporting pinned Marine units near the beach, airstrikes were committed elsewhere, and artillery was still being unloaded from ships. No assets would be available to hit the tank battalion for at least 4 hours. By then, darkness would have fallen, and the tanks would likely have relocated. Tachsky stared at the 37 tanks and did the math. His platoon had 6 bazookas, 6 rounds each, 36 rockets total, one short of matching the number of tanks. The odds were nearly even. The decision violated every tactical principle the Marine Corps taught. A 40-man unit did not attack a tank battalion, but Tachsky hadn't recruited rule followers. He'd recruited men who fought dirty to survive. At 4:15 p.m., he ordered the platoon to prepare for an assault. If they succeeded, they'd avert a potential disaster at the beachhead. If they failed, 40 men would die, their fates lost to the jungle. Strombo checked his bazooka and counted his rounds. 6 shots to take out 6 tanks, then it would come down to hand-to-hand combat. Tachsky positioned the 6 bazooka teams in a semicircle around the staging area, 40 yards apart to maximize coverage, each team consisting of a shooter and a loader. The plan was straightforward: hit as many tanks as possible in the first 30 seconds, then withdraw into the jungle before Japanese infantry could respond. They knew they couldn't destroy all 37 tanks, but disabling 10 or 15 would drastically reduce the threat to the beachhead. But at 4:25 p.m., as the team settled into position, everything changed. The Japanese tanks roared to life, 37 diesel engines firing simultaneously, their noise echoing through the jungle. Tank crews emerged from camouflage dugouts and climbed aboard. Officers shouted orders, and infantry units formed up around the vehicles. This wasn't a repositioning, it was preparation for an attack. Tachsky checked his watch. 4:28 p.m. Sunset was at 7:12 p.m., and the Japanese were gearing up for a dusk assault earlier than intelligence had predicted. The element of surprise was gone. The entire enemy force was alert and organizing for combat. Tachsky shifted tactics. His platoon would shadow the tank battalion, reporting its movements in real time. Attacking now would only get his men killed, but tracking the tanks would let Marine units at the beach prepare their defenses. He radioed headquarters with an update: enemy tank battalion mobilizing for assault. Estimated arrival at American lines between 7 and 8 p.m. The reply was immediate: maintain observation. Do not engage. Continue reporting. The tank battalion began moving at 5:07 p.m., advancing in 2 columns along parallel routes toward the coast, flanked by approximately 1,000 Japanese infantry. This was no probing attack. It was a major offensive, designed to break through Marine lines and reach the beaches before nightfall. If successful, they could destroy supply dumps, artillery positions, and command posts, collapsing the entire American invasion in a single evening. The 40 Thieves followed at a distance, 200 yards to the flank, using jungle cover to stay concealed. Every 10 minutes, Tachsky radioed updated coordinates, allowing Marine units at the beach to reposition. Bazookas were distributed to frontline troops. Sherman tanks from the 2nd Marine Tank Battalion moved forward, and artillery batteries adjusted their aim points. The entire division braced for a nighttime tank assault. At 6:15 p.m., roughly 1 mile from the beach, the Japanese formation halted. Officers gathered for a conference, which Tachsky observed through binoculars from 300 yards away. The men argued, one pointed toward the coast, another toward the north, and a third unfurled a map. After 11 minutes, the officers returned to their units, and the formation turned north. Tachsky was confused. Marine intelligence maps showed no valuable targets in that direction, only jungle and rough terrain. The column advanced another mile north, then turned west toward the coast once more. By 7:05 p.m., as the sun dipped below the horizon, Tachsky realized their plan. The Japanese weren't targeting the main beachhead. They were aiming for the gap between the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions. A breakthrough there would split American forces in two. Tachsky radioed the warning, but the Japanese had timed their move perfectly. Dusk blurred visibility. Radio communication grew spotty as Marine units switched frequencies for night operations. Artillery batteries were in the middle of resupplying ammunition, and Sherman tanks were refueling. The gap between divisions was defended by just 2 Marine companies, about 340 men, against 37 tanks and 1,000 infantry. At 7:23 p.m., the Japanese attack began. From elevated ground, the 40 Thieves watched as enemy tanks rolled forward through the twilight. Marine defensive positions erupted with bazooka fire, taking out the first 3 tanks, but 34 more pressed on. Japanese infantry charged behind them, screaming and firing, forcing Marines to fall back from their initial positions. The breakthrough was gaining momentum. Within 15 minutes, enemy tanks would reach the beach. Tachsky's gaze darted between his 6 bazookas and the 34 tanks below, then locked onto a critical detail. One Type 97 tank had split from the main formation, speeding toward the 6th Marine Regiment's command post, where Colonel Risley was coordinating the division's response. The tank raced through the darkness at 15 miles per hour, following a ravine that led straight to the command post. Its commander had identified a 200-yard gap in Marine defenses, where jungle terrain prevented anti-tank weapons from being positioned effectively. If the tank reached its target, it could destroy radio equipment, kill senior officers, and paralyze the regiment's ability to counter the main attack. Colonel Risley and his staff were 400 yards away, completely unaware of the approaching threat. Tachsky had 3 minutes to act. He grabbed Private Herbert Hayes, the platoon's top bazooka shooter. Hayes had destroyed 6 targets during training at Camp Tarawa without a single miss. But training targets didn't move, didn't shoot back, and didn't have 50-millimeter thick frontal armor designed to deflect rockets. Hayes needed a perfect side shot to guarantee penetration. Tachsky and Hayes sprinted down the slope, racing to intercept the tank before it reached the command post. At 7:31 p.m., they took up position 30 yards from the tank's projected path. Hayes dropped prone and aimed. 20 seconds later, the tank emerged from the ravine, its turret rotating as it searched for targets, the commander standing in the open hatch scanning the darkness with binoculars. Hayes waited for the perfect moment. The tank advanced to 15 yards, then stopped, its engine idling as the commander checked his map to confirm his position. At 7:32 p.m., Hayes fired. The rocket struck the tank's left side just below the turret ring, where the armor was thinnest. The shaped charge pierced the hull and detonated inside, killing all 4 crew members instantly. 6 seconds later, the tank's ammunition cooked off, engulfing the vehicle in flames. The fireball illuminated the jungle for 300 yards in every direction. Nearby Japanese infantry saw the explosion and assumed they'd stumbled upon a major Marine defensive position, redirecting their assault away from the command post toward the perceived threat. Tachsky's bold shot had done more than destroy 1 tank. It had inadvertently diverted an entire Japanese infantry battalion from the Marines' most vulnerable point. The command post remained secure, and Colonel Risley continued coordinating the response unimpeded. But the bazooka's muzzle flash had revealed the 40 Thieves' position to every Japanese soldier within 500 yards. Machine gun fire raked their location, and mortar rounds began to fall. The platoon had to withdraw immediately or be overrun. Withdrawing through the jungle in darkness under fire tested every skill the 40 Thieves had learned. Standard protocol called for units to stay together, but jungle terrain and enemy fire made that impossible. The platoon split into small teams of 4 or 5 men, each moving independently toward prearranged rally points. Japanese patrols swarmed the area, hunting for the Marines who'd destroyed their tank. Several times, teams found themselves yards from enemy soldiers, relying on silent movement and concealment instead of engaging. One firefight would bring overwhelming enemy reinforcements. Private Strombo's team encountered a Japanese patrol at 8:05 p.m. 7 soldiers sweeping the jungle with flashlights. Strombo and 3 other Marines lay motionless in the undergrowth as the patrol passed within 10 feet. One Japanese soldier stopped, staring directly at Strombo's hiding spot. The Marine held his breath for 43 seconds as the soldier stood frozen in the darkness, then finally turned and followed his unit. By 9 p.m., roughly half the platoon, 23 men, had reached the primary rally point, a small clearing 600 yards behind Marine lines. 17 were still missing, possibly dead, captured, or lost in the dark. Standard Marine procedure dictated waiting up to 2 hours for missing personnel at rally points, but this location was too close to Japanese positions. Enemy patrols were actively searching the area, so Tachsky decided to move the 23 men back to friendly lines and send rescue teams at dawn to find the missing. The group departed at 9:17 p.m., approaching Marine lines cautiously. Nervous sentries often fired at moving targets after dark. Tachsky used the prearranged recognition signal. 3 short whistles followed by 2 long ones. After responding to the sentry's challenge with the correct password, the 40 thieves crossed into friendly territory at 9:41 p.m. 23 men had made it back. 17 remained in the jungle. The Japanese tank attack raged through the night. Marine defenses reported enemy armor probing their lines until 3:14 a.m. American bazookas destroyed 11 tanks. Sherman tanks knocked out 9 more, and artillery disabled 7. By dawn on June 16, the Japanese had lost 27 of their 37 tanks. The attack had failed, but it came at a heavy cost to the Marines. The 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines reported 78 casualties, and Company F of the 2nd Marines suffered 19 killed or wounded. The gap between divisions had held, but barely. At first light, Tachsky assembled search teams, each 4 men strong, with orders to locate the 17 missing Marines and return by noon. The teams departed at 6:30 a.m., retracing the platoon's previous evening's route. They found the first body at 7:05 a.m. Private Donald Evans, shot twice in the chest, likely killed during the withdrawal. He died instantly, and his dog tags were missing. Japanese troops often collected them as trophies. The team buried Evans in a shallow grave, marking it with his rifle and helmet. At 8:20 a.m., a second team found 3 more bodies. These Marines had been captured alive, then executed, their hands tied behind their backs, killed by bayonets. Japanese forces on Saipan rarely took prisoners. The Imperial Army viewed surrender as dishonorable and extended that contempt to enemy soldiers. These 3 hadn't surrendered. They'd been wounded, captured, and murdered. The team radioed the discovery to Tachsky, who ordered them to continue searching for the remaining 13. By 10 a.m., search teams had located 6 missing Marines alive. They'd become separated during the night withdrawal, but had evaded Japanese patrols and reached Marine lines independently, bringing the accounted-for total to 29. 13 were still missing. At 11:15 a.m., one team radioed in. They'd found 5 more Marines hiding in a cave system 1 mile behind Japanese lines. The men were alive but pinned down by enemy patrols, unable to move without being detected. Tachsky faced another choice: request artillery support to create a diversion, allowing the trapped Marines to escape, or send a rescue team immediately, relying on stealth and speed. Artillery would alert the Japanese to American interest in the area, complicating future rescues, while a rescue team was faster but riskier. Tachsky chose speed, assembling a 6-man team and departing at 11:47 a.m. They reached the cave system at 12:33 p.m., finding the 5 Marines exhausted and dehydrated but uninjured. One had malaria with a 103 degrees Fahrenheit fever, and another suffered from dysentery, barely able to walk. The team distributed water and medical supplies, then prepared to extract them. The extraction required crossing 1 mile of Japanese-controlled territory in broad daylight. Standard tactics called for nighttime movement, but the sick Marines couldn't survive another 12 hours without medical care. Tachsky decided to move immediately, prioritizing speed over concealment. The combined group of 11 Marines set out at 1:05 p.m., making it 400 yards before encountering a 20-man Japanese patrol moving in a standard search formation. They had 2 options: hide and hope the patrol passed, or ambush the enemy to eliminate the threat. Hiding risked discovery. Ambushing risked drawing more troops with gunfire. Tachsky chose an ambush, positioning his men in an L shape, 8 along the patrol's path, 3 at the end to cut off escapes. At 1:23 p.m., the Japanese walked into the kill zone. Tachsky gave the signal, and 11 Marines opened fire simultaneously. The patrol was wiped out in 7 seconds. 20 enemy dead, no survivors, no radio calls for help. But the gunfire echoed for half a mile, and Japanese units would converge on the area within minutes. The Marines fled at a full run, abandoning stealth for speed. Behind them, Japanese voices shouted commands and whistles blew as enemy forces mobilized. Tachsky estimated they had 5 minutes before being surrounded. The nearest friendly position was 800 yards away across open ground with little cover, and carrying 2 sick Marines would take 12 minutes. Math that guaranteed the Japanese would catch them first. At 1:29 p.m., they hit a roadblock, a 40-foot deep ravine with near vertical sides. Going around added 15 minutes. Descending and climbing slowed them, but staying on the ridge meant certain contact. Tachsky chose the ravine. The Marines slid and climbed down the slope, supporting the sick men between them, reaching the bottom at 1:33 p.m., just 60 seconds before Japanese soldiers appeared on the ridge above. Enemy fire rained down, bullets ricocheting off rocks. One Marine was shot in the leg, another hit by shrapnel from a grenade. The group returned fire while advancing, using boulders and vegetation for cover, but the ravine forced them into a single direction. At 1:38 p.m., they realized they were trapped. The ravine ended in a box canyon with no exit. Japanese soldiers descended from multiple points, moving to surround them. Tachsky counted at least 40 enemy soldiers, with more arriving by the minute. His 11 men had roughly 200 rounds of ammunition left. The 2 sick Marines could barely fight, leaving 9 combat-effective men against a growing force. Artillery and air support were impossible. They were too close to enemy positions. The 40 Thieves were on their own. Then Tachsky noticed something the Japanese had missed. Vegetation at the canyon's rear wall suggested water seepage, indicating a crack in the rock. He sent 2 Marines to investigate while the rest set up defenses. At 1:44 p.m., the 2 Marines reported back, a narrow opening behind the vegetation, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Beyond it, the fissure widened into an upward-sloping passage. The Marines moved through one by one, pushing the sick men first, removing their packs to fit. Inside, it was pitch black. They moved by touch, following the man ahead. Behind them, Japanese soldiers entered the canyon, searching for the Americans who'd seemingly vanished. The passage emerged on the opposite side of the ridge at 2:07 p.m., 400 yards from where they'd entered. With the Japanese focused on the ravine, the group raced toward friendly lines covering the final 600 yards in 8 minutes. They crossed into American territory at 2:23 p.m., all 11 safe. The sick men were immediately evacuated to medical stations, bringing the accounted-for total to 34. 8 remained missing. As the day wore on, 3 more missing Marines were found alive, having evaded capture and reached lines independently. Advancing Marine units discovered 2 more bodies, leaving 3 unaccounted for by nightfall on June 16th, officially listed as missing in action. In their first 48 hours on Saipan, the 40 Thieves had lost at least 6 men killed, 3 missing and presumed dead, a 22% casualty rate. Despite the losses, they'd fulfilled their mission, identifying over 200 Japanese positions, calling in strikes that destroyed dozens of fortifications, stopping a tank from reaching the regimental command post, and providing critical intelligence on enemy movements. Colonel Risley sent Tachsky a message. The platoon would have 1 night to rest, resupply, and integrate replacements. At dawn on June 17th, they'd return to the jungle, this time deeper behind enemy lines than ever before. The Japanese garrisons still numbered 29,000. The 40 Thieves were now 37 men strong. At 5:30 a.m. on June 17th, the 40 Thieves departed Marine lines in total darkness. Their objective, a ridge system 3 miles inland, where intelligence suspected Japanese artillery positions. These guns had shelled American positions continuously for 2 days, killing dozens and disrupting supplies. Aerial reconnaissance couldn't locate them. They were camouflaged inside caves. Only ground recon could find them, and the mission required penetrating farther behind enemy lines than any U.S. unit had gone on Saipan. The platoon moved in silence using hand signals to communicate. They covered the first mile in 47 minutes without encountering patrols. The second mile slowed due to steep slopes, dense vegetation, and rocky terrain. They reached the ridge at 8:15 a.m. and began systematic recon. Stretching 2 miles long and 600 feet above the jungle, the ridge was dotted with Japanese positions. Tachsky counted 8 cave entrances, large enough to hide artillery, connected by tunnels that let the Japanese move guns between positions, fire a few rounds, and relocate before counterfire hit, explaining why Marine artillery had failed to destroy them. Finding the guns was only half the mission. They also needed to map the tunnel system for assault units. At 9:40 a.m., Corporal Roscoe Mullins and Private Strombo volunteered to enter the largest cave while the rest provided security. Equipped with small, shielded flashlights, they ventured 200 feet into the cave before it branched into multiple passages. Japanese voices echoed in the distance. The air smelled of gunpowder and human waste. At 10:12 a.m., they found the first artillery piece, a Type 91 105mm howitzer with ammunition stored in rock recesses. The crew was absent, likely sleeping elsewhere. Mullins and Strombo marked the location and pressed deeper, discovering 2 more guns, a command post, an ammunition magazine with 2,000 rounds, and sleeping quarters for 60 soldiers. The tunnel system was far more extensive than intelligence had guessed. At 11:03 a.m., they heard Japanese soldiers approaching. With 15 seconds to hide, they squeezed into a small alcove and froze as a dozen enemy troops walked past, just 3 feet away, conversing in Japanese. Once the patrol was gone, the 2 Marines decided to exit. They'd gathered enough intelligence. They emerged at 11:27 a.m. and reported to Tachsky, who studied their map. The tunnels connected all 8 caves, housing at least 6 artillery pieces. Standard assault tactics would fail. Machine guns covered every entrance, and caves were too deep for artillery. The only solution was to seal the entrances with demolitions, but Marine engineers were days away. At 12:15 p.m., the platoon moved to their secondary objective, Garapan, Saipan's pre-war administrative capital. Intelligence wanted to know if the Japanese were defending the town or had withdrawn inland. Reaching Garapan required crossing 4 miles of enemy territory in daylight, but the 40 thieves had operated undetected for 30 hours. Tachsky believed they could complete 1 more recon before withdrawing. They approached from the east at 3:40 p.m. The town was in ruins, heavily bombed by U.S. aircraft and shelled by naval gunfire. But Japanese soldiers moved through the debris, confirming a presence. Tachsky needed closer recon to assess enemy strength. At 4:05 p.m., he made a decision that would become legendary in Marine Corps history. 5 Marines would enter Garapan in broad daylight to gather intelligence, a near-suicidal mission, but exactly what the 40 thieves were trained for. Tachsky selected Strombo, Mullins, Corporal Irazi, and Private Don Evans, joining them himself. They discarded noisy gear, canteens, extra ammo, grenades, carrying only rifles, knives, and sidearms. At 4:23 p.m., they moved toward Garapan's eastern edge, using ruined buildings for cover, aware every pile of rubble could hide enemy troops. They entered the town at 4:41 p.m., slipping through back streets and staying in shadows. At least 200 Japanese troops were visible in the town center, with hundreds more likely in surrounding buildings. The Japanese weren't defending Garapan as a fortress. They were using it as a staging area for counterattacks, a critical distinction for Marine commanders planning an assault. At 5:08 p.m., Irazi spotted 5 Japanese military bicycles leaning against a partially destroyed building, used by officers to move between positions. An idea struck. 5 bicycles, 5 Marines. They could pose as Japanese soldiers moving between posts, drawing less attention than men hiding on foot. The plan was audacious, violating all standard recon procedures. But Tachsky approved instantly. The Marines seized the bicycles and began riding through Garapan at 5:15 p.m., moving casually through the ruins. Japanese troops ignored them. Some waved, others shouted greetings in Japanese, which the Marines acknowledged with hand gestures. For 43 minutes, they rode through the enemy capital, mapping positions, counting troops, and identifying supply dumps, passing yards from Japanese officers who never suspected they were enemy recon. At 5:58 p.m., they completed their circuit, exited Garapan, and rode the bicycles another mile before abandoning them and vanishing into the jungle. Their recon provided detailed intelligence on enemy deployments, letting Marine commanders know exactly where to focus their assault. The 40 Thieves reached Marine lines at 7:32 p.m., 14 hours behind enemy lines, having gone deeper than any other U.S. unit on Saipan. Over the next 3 weeks, the 40 Thieves continued their missions, mapping enemy positions across Saipan's interior, calling in artillery strikes, ambushing patrols, and saving countless Marine lives. They witnessed unspeakable Japanese atrocities, civilians forced to jump from cliffs rather than surrender, wounded Marines used as ambush bait, prisoners executed. Operating in small teams for days without contact with friendly forces, they endured malaria, dysentery, heat exhaustion, and tropical diseases. They ran out of food and stole from Japanese supply dumps, drank from contaminated streams when water ran low. By July 9th, when Saipan was declared secure, the 40 Thieves had lost 12 men killed and 9 wounded, a 56% casualty rate, below the 73% average for scout snipers but still devastating. Survivors were physically and mentally shattered, most having lost 30 to 40 pounds, several suffering from malaria fevers, all haunted by what they'd seen. But their mission was a success. Marine commanders estimated their recon reduced overall casualties by at least 15%, saving 2,000 lives. The platoon went on to fight at Tinian in July 1944, then returned to Saipan for mopping up operations. After the war, most members struggled with what would later be diagnosed as PTSD, recurring nightmares, alcoholism, difficulty holding jobs or maintaining relationships. Their psychological scars were never officially recognized or treated. Frank Tachsky returned to civilian life, becoming mayor of Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. He never spoke about the war. His son Joseph only learned of the 40 Thieves after finding his father's footlocker following his death in 2011. The story of the platoon that reshaped Marine Corps tactics remained largely untold for 66 years. The 6th Marine Regiment's Scout Sniper Platoon was one of America's first elite special operations units. Their tactics, deep recon, silent killing, independent behind enemy lines operations, influenced modern special forces like Navy SEALs and Marine Force Recon. They proved small, highly trained units could accomplish what entire battalions couldn't. 40 men recruited from brigs and punishment details became one of the most effective combat units of the Pacific War. The Marines who called them criminals were wrong. They were warriors. If Lieutenant Tachsky's story moved you, hit that like button. It helps YouTube share these forgotten stories with more people who need to hear them. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We post new Untold History daily, and you won't want to miss it. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? The US, UK, Canada, Australia, or elsewhere? Our community spans the globe, and you're helping keep these memories alive. Also, tell us, did any of your relatives serve in World War II, especially in the Pacific Theater? Thank you for watching. Frank Tachsky and his 40 Thieves deserve to be remembered. These men sacrificed everything so future generations could live in freedom. By watching, liking, and sharing, you're ensuring their legacy endures. Never forget.